After graduating from the University of California, Los Angeles, three friends decided to take a risk and start their own video game company. Silicon and Synapse got off to a good start, developing the first American-made game for the Super Nintendo with RPM Racing. After producing a number of ports, they went on to create a number of original titles like The Lost Vikings and Rock and Roll Racing. 1994 saw the young company go through a number of changes, including their acquisition by Davidson & Associates and a renaming to Blizzard Entertainment. Alongside the platformer Blackthorn, Blizzard released Warcraft: Orcs and Humans. Warcraft was only the second entrant into the real-time strategy genre and was the first RTS to have multiplayer. With good reviews and solid sales across the board, Blizzard was starting to find its feet. Warcraft had been the first game they'd self-published. So going into 1995, they had a number of sequels they wanted to work on, and were also looking to expand their publishing business. And in so doing, began their ascent to the top of their industry. During 1994, Blizzard had once again been commissioned to make a game based on DC Comics superheroes. Justice League Task Force was to take the comic book icons into the fighting realm, a genre that had recently become popular. To make it, publisher Acclaim had contracted multiple developers. While Blizzard was put to work on the Super Nintendo version, another studio in Redwood City, Condor Entertainment, created the Genesis version. Though the two teams had never worked together, by chance, Blizzard CEO Alan Adham had met some of Condor's leads at a convention. Then in January 1995, Blizzard got an unexpected phone call. It was from Condor. They were working on a new game, an original idea of their own, and they were looking for a publisher. They'd gone to every single major publisher, and then a couple of little publishers, but all of them had turned them down. They all thought Condor was insane. With no PC experience, they wanted to craft a turn-based claymation action RPG in an epic story. Now, the Condor team was so desperate, they were turning to guys they'd bumped into once at a convention. But Blizzard saw something in the project. They thought there was an opportunity here to produce a top-notch game the likes of which nobody had ever seen before. And so, Blizzard agreed and signed the lucky developer as the first outside studio to publish through them. The working title of the game was Diablo. As Condor continued to roll on their game, Blizzard finished up The Lost Vikings 2, Norse by Northwest. Our three plucky lads once again are kidnapped by Tomator, but this time they augment themselves with some of his futuristic gear, and are even joined by a dragon and a werewolf. Gameplay-wise, this meant more characters and more abilities for each of them, though the player was still limited to 3 characters at a time. The game was well received, though it didn't leave the same impact as its predecessor. But in the meantime, Blizzard was working on another sequel, and this one would blow its predecessor away. Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness released in December 1995. On the surface of it, it looked a lot like its predecessor. It was a fantasy real-time strategy game with 2 largely identical factions. But in 100 little details, it refined the formula to perfection.
I would definitely say that Warcraft 2 is probably the game that, where I really think you start to see the Blizzard polish sort of bloom in the form of a really awesome game. Not to say that the games we created before that weren't awesome as well, but I just think that that's where we really started to shine.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also Warcraft 2 was sort of like turning everything up a notch. It was more players, it was higher resolution, it was land, sea, and air. We had been working on Warcraft for a year, so the team already really knew what it was doing in terms of developing that game.
Of Warcraft 2's many changes, one of the most significant to its genre was persistent fog of war. In earlier RTS games, once an area of the map had been explored, the player could always see it. In Warcraft 2, a player would only have sight on a location if he had a unit there to watch it. It made scouting an integral part of the experience, and has since become universal in strategy titles. Blizzard's humor and personality blossomed into something truly special with this title, from the epic storyline to the unit responses.
What? Look out! missed me. That tickles.
The creation of such a vibrant world with its own sense of character has since become a distinguishing feature of the company. Another major addition was the expansion of multiplayer's capabilities. Warcraft 2 could do much more than just head-to-head. Teams of up to 4 players each could now go at it in massive battles of incredible strategic complexity. However, it was still limited to local networks or a direct IP connection. However, earlier that year, a couple of enthusiasts had coded a program that would allow different LAN games to be played over the internet. The program was called Kali. This program, which had nothing directly to do with Blizzard, catapulted Warcraft 2 to towering success.
And with Warcraft 1, it was a cool game, it was a fun game, but you were really limited in terms of the community of people that you could play with. And so I really think that the homegrown community that grew around Warcraft 2 on the internet was a big factor. I mean, it's just sort of, it's word of mouth that you just can't put a price on.
And there was one other multiplayer match being played, the one between Blizzard and the creators of the RTS genre, Westwood Studios. Just a few months before Warcraft 2, they had finally released a new strategy game of their own, Command & Conquer. That game was also a finely polished strategy masterpiece, and the release of the two great games so close to each other ignited a craze for the genre. Of course, each title generated its own fans, and the young internet burst into one of its first flame wars over which title was superior. Then, as now, the idea that different people could enjoy different games was unacceptable. Of course, all the noise just made them both more visible. The result was a monster hit for Blizzard. In just 4 months, Warcraft 2 sold 500,000 copies, astounding for a little studio in 1995. It would eventually cross the magic 1 million sold mark, an honor only few games had achieved up to that time. Not bad for a game made in only 10 months. After the game had been well established as a hit, Blizzard decided that they wanted an expansion pack for it. As they were already starting to roll onto other projects, however, they handed Beyond the Dark Portal over to developer Cyberlore Studios, who finished the expansion in 1996. Meanwhile, Condor was still hard at work on Diablo. Their turn-based claymation RPG combat game was coming along nicely. But their new publisher, Blizzard, insisted they make some changes. First of all, they wanted them to switch from claymation to 3D graphics, since 3D was quickly emerging as the wave of the future, and because claymation was just bonkers. In addition, Blizzard wanted Condor to switch from turn-based to real-time. Condor resisted at first. All the work they'd done was based on turns. Communication between the two studios became something of an issue.
Yeah, I would say that dealing with a studio remotely was a huge challenge for us at the time. I mean, we were really young and new to project management, still relatively new to the industry and new to making games, and so to be working with a studio that was not nearby was a big challenge.
Finally, they agreed to make a real-time tech demo, just to see how it played. Almost immediately, Condor realized how much more exciting real-time was. After that, Condor went real-time, full-time. Pretty soon, it was obvious to Blizzard that Condor was onto something massive. That was it. They didn't want to publish it anymore. They wanted to own it.
Condor was developing Diablo, and the project was going so well, and we enjoyed working with them so much that we wanted to make them internal studio part of Blizzard. So we talked to Davidson & Associates, our parent company, and they were excited about the idea, and so in a very short time, Condor became Blizzard North.
At E3 1996, the game was finally revealed to the public. It generated great buzz. No one had ever seen a game like it before, and after Warcraft 2, Blizzard was one of the hottest developers in the world. That same E3, Blizzard also had 2 other reveals. The first was Battle.net, a free online multiplayer service that would be included with every copy of Diablo. No longer would players have to fall back on the third-party Kali. Blizzard would provide its own finely polished matchmaking service so that people could play random games over the internet. The final reveal was a less welcome surprise. A boring science fiction clone of Warcraft with the knockoff title, StarCraft. While the Blizzard booth originally had 3 monitors for Diablo and 3 for StarCraft, by the end of the show, StarCraft was down to 1 monitor. It didn't look any better than last year's Warcraft 2, and more important, it didn't look any different. While Blizzard North was busy making a game like no one had ever seen before, their southern cousin seemed to be cannibalizing itself. When the show was over, Blizzard had to decide what to do with the project. They were already well into development on the game, but the reaction had been underwhelming, to say the least.
That E3, there were quite a lot of other real-time strategy games in development, and a lot of them looked quite good. And we came back to the office and we were just talking about sort of the state of the genre and the state of the where the RTS genre was going, and we really we realized that we needed to step it up with StarCraft.
In the end, they made a hard call. Rather than release a mediocre product, they chose to scrap the work they'd done and start over from scratch. StarCraft would not see the light of day again for years. Diablo, on the other hand, had connected with its audience and was set to conquer the market. However, to make sure the game was just right, Blizzard ended up missing its planned holiday release for 1996.
I mean, when we were finishing Diablo down the stretch, we had guys from the Irvine office that had gone up there and were basically living up there temporarily, helping finish the game. And Battle.net development was taking place in Irvine. So we were coordinating Battle.net platform and the Diablo development and our support for the development of the game and getting out the door. We actually brought the large majority of the StarCraft team down to help ship the first Diablo game.
What a lot of people don't realize too is the decision to have Diablo playable on Battle.net wasn't made until very late in that project. That was not an idea we'd been working on for very long. In fact, I think the entire Battle.net development took place in a matter of months.
In fact, they finished the game on December 26th, missing Christmas trees everywhere by just one day. It finally hit store shelves on January 2nd, 1997, and smashed. Diablo's combination of RPG upgrades and action mechanics was unbeatable. A fully realized world was fleshed out by an epic storyline that perfectly complemented the gameplay. What was more, no two gamers would play the same experience. Diablo's levels were randomly generated, which meant that every time the player ran through it, he'd experience new dungeons, items, and enemies. It gave Diablo an incredible replay value that static games could only dream of. And a player could enter into these random dungeons with others. Co-op multiplayer was supported, allowing up to 4 heroes to help each other smite their foes. Sadly, the co-op had friendly fire turned on, which meant that one player could kill another. This led to many players just killing off all their teammates for a few chuckles. How diabolical. On top of the game itself, Diablo was the first project of Blizzard's new cinematics team. Their job was to create high-quality pre-rendered cutscenes to give Blizzard's game a cinematic flair that no other studio could match. Those first scenes might look pretty dated today, but they were the beginning of one of Blizzard's signature features. It all combined into another monster success. Diablo became Blizzard's second game in a row to cross the 1 million sold mark, which, again, only a handful of games had done up to that point. Blizzard was now one of the most prominent developers in the entire business. Their games had a level of polish, presentation, and personality that no one else seemed able to achieve. Their only real problem was that sci-fi knockoff of Warcraft they were still kicking around. It was taking even longer than expected to make it any good. The question was, would StarCraft ever become something Blizzard could be proud of? Tune in next time to see Blizzard create a gaming legend.
I remember one morning I came into the office to work on, and we were working on Warcraft 2 at the time, and I went to copy down. We didn't use revision control of any kind for our source code or our data or anything at the time, so all of the source code and data and everything was stored on the network. And I went to copy down the latest version of everything from the network, and the folder that everything was supposed to be in was gone. And it turns out one of the developers the night before, late that night, one of the guys in QA was trying to delete the directory from his local hard drive, but actually ran the deltree command on the network hard drive, so when everyone came in the next morning, it was completely gone. And so he lives on today with the infamous nickname of Deltree. Dave Hale, he still works here. I'll call him out.
Deltree Dave.
Dave Deltree Hale.